My name is Bruce Williamson. I'm here at the annual meeting of the Association for Tropical Biology and Conservation. It is 50th anniversary with the ATBC and OTS. Our guest for the interview today is José Sarukhán from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. Jose, when was your involvement? When did you start with OTS?
OTS, it was in 1965 when I came as a faculty with Dan Jansen, Norman Scott, etc. That was the first fundamentals course in OTS, which was an absolutely enjoyable experience for me. I learned a lot of tropical biology, teaching tropical botany. I was the botanist of the group because I had been working with tropical trees in Mexico. And the second, I learned a lot of English because I wasn't very fluent in English. So all my students really were very patient with me and sort of bore the effort with me very, very nicely and very gently. But before that, I was invited to the course, the very first course, as a student, I was invited, that Paul Richards taught. I think 1 or 2 years earlier. And for some reason, there was some conflict of some kind that my supervisor, Efraim Hernandez, decided I was not going there. I don't know exactly what was the problem. But the next time, I was invited by Dan and sort of went to that first 65.
And you came as a teacher, not a student.
No, I came as a teacher.
So you had never had the course and you were invited.
A bit baffling for me, but anyway, that was the story. And certainly it was a phenomenal occasion. We had a superb group of students, people like Joel Cohen, Joel Crackraft, Bob Jenkins. I mean, really, so many more I don't remember in this moment, but it was excellent. It really opened my universe in so many ways. It was a very forming experience for me at that age, certainly.
That was interesting to hear you say you were invited as the plant ecologist, because I hadn't thought about the fact that the original courses that the Jansen courses were teachers at least were heavily oriented towards zoology.
It was. That's why I'm saying it was the only botanist, and I had been working already by that time quite a bit on secondary succession in the tropics. I had been working with the tropical forests in Mexico. We had tropical evergreen forests in things that now nobody does, but it was the structure and composition of forests and the strata and the dominant trees, all this, but not rubbish, but I mean, it was very basic stuff. But that, I mean, I did have experience, obviously, otherwise I don't know what I would have been able to accomplish.
I think that was a big contribution, because for many years, I think in the early OTS courses, we had more tropical zoologists than we did tropical botanists.
Sure, that was the case.
You know? In fact, one of the students remarked to me the other day that most of the talks she had attended were about plants, and she was surprised there weren't more talks about animals. And when she said that, it just struck me how the things have reversed now.
Quite.
You know, I mean, 50 years down the road, most of the talks here are about plants, plant communities, plant systematics.
Well, I learned a lot about all kinds of reptiles with Norman, and birds and ants. Rettenmeier was in part of that course, so we went to.
Rettenmeier was there.
Yes, we went to pillage a nest of army ants. It was quite an experience.
That's great.
Well, no, that was really a wonderful occasion.
Jansen and Scott carried on courses for the next
Several years. I
5 or 6
don't
years.
remember.
Yeah.
Because very shortly after that, I went to get my degree at Wales, at the
Now that
University
you
of Wales.
taught an OTS course, you had to go get your degree. right?
In Wales, yes,
Yeah.
of all places. But my interest was really to get into plant demography with John Harper, and that was the mecca for that kind of thing. So I jumped from the tropics into Welsh grasslands with sheep and cows and buttercups and all that.
So did you do your dissertation research in Wales?
In
or-
Wales, yeah, completely, yeah,
I
on
knew you
plant
went.
demography.
I knew you went to school there, but a lot of people go and take courses and they come do the
No,
research.
I stayed 4 years,
Those
4
days you-
full years for my
You
research.
stayed
yeah.
there. And then when you came back to Mexico, and
I went into the National University, UNAM. Fortunately, there was a post for me, so I entered there. I was really the only person with a, let me call it a proper ecology degree, because there were some people interested. Arturo Gomez Pompa, on one hand, who was my supervisor for my licenciatura thesis on secondary succession with Dioscorea and all that. But nobody had really a full
he didn't have
training.
He wasn't trained as an ecologist.
Not properly. He
No.
was more, it was this mixture of taxonomy, biogeography, floristics, that kind of thing.
Well, that's interesting. So, did you have any further contact with OTS for?
Yes,
The next
when I returned from Wales, I returned from Wales in 72, and I think in 73, 74, and maybe 75, I was invited to OTS courses
be a visiting
as
faculty.
a visiting faculty, yes, no longer as a full-time. I had a lot of work. I was starting my own research in Mexico, so I think I taught in 3 courses. And after that, my work in the field, I was working already in the 2 stations of UNAM, Los Tuxtlas and Chamela, and it was full-time, and I was building my group of students and all that, so I preferred not to divert my little energies into so many things.
Did Mexico start sending students at that time to OTS, or?
It started actually, one of the first students we sent was Rodolfo Dirso, who was one of my students.
Rodolfo was one of your students.
Yes,
Ah,
he was
I
the
didn't-
first student I had.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. He was working with me first on demography of pines in the state of Guerrero, and then on Astrocarium, which was our star species to work with. At that time, it was a complex place because there was some guerrilla activity, but we never had any problem at all in that place. And we were sleeping down big in the mountain.
It's probably
Sort of
safer then.
very, very isolated, never had a problem. But that time, what I wanted was to attract students, work with me in research in the field, get to know this, read a lot of literature, and then select a university in different fields of ecology. I didn't want to clone myself and have a score of plant population demographers. I mean, one is enough. So, what I wanted was to send people into different areas. So Rodolfo went to work on plant-animal interactions with John Harper as well at Wales, and other people went to population genetics at Davies, and others went into plant physiology or plant physiology was one of the things, or ecophysiology and things like that. So I really wanted to start assembling a group of well-trained ecologists that will come back to Mexico and start assembling what would be really the first proper group of research in ecology, so we could offer a doctoral degree, which was really the aim of all that. I wasn't keen on training students at the doctoral level with only one person to interact in the ecological area. I mean, it didn't make any sense to me. So that was the reason. So Rodolfo was, after having been in OTS, was the first to go abroad to Wales, or John Harper again, but in a very different field, and so forth. So it was a long chain of students.
Right. That started kind of the Mexican school of ecology in the sense of it's kind of a unique,
at least in the, let's call it in the botanical sort of approach. Not so much. I didn't work with animals, so although some of the students that were with me went into that area, like Gerardo Ceballos or Rodrigo Medellin or others that went into some animal group.
I feel like there is and I wouldn't know how to define it, but there is a kind of Mexican school of thought in plant ecology that, like in our OTS courses, for example, it's always one of the wonderful things is the mix of students that come with different interests and different ideas. Having one or two Mexican students seems to diversify those discussions some way, and I don't know exactly what it is.
I hope they are not eccentric ideas. Well, I don't know. That is what makes a good academic atmosphere really fruitful and enjoyable for students.
It may be their experience, like you say, that you took some initiative to have the students see drier forest over in Guerrero and see the wetter forest in Los Tuxtlas.
Yeah, well, actually working in the two stations, Bruce, Los Tuxtlas, which is tropical wet forest, and Chamela, which is tropical deciduous forest, we had really a broad experience of working with different systems. But I moved from classical orthodox plant population ecology, demography, to other things, and the other things were systems ecology. We established a series of sites which were replications of basins, small basins, to work on water, energy cycles, nutrient cycles. It was really biogeochemical studies of the forest to try and understand the levels of stability of the systems, and then to try and manipulate these systems and see how that stable cycle started changing and moving into different directions. So that broadened the scope of students being trained in different areas. Yes. Manuel Mas, who worked there, that study in Chamela on water catchments is now maybe 37, 40 years old, continuously of observations.
Wow, that's terrific.
So it's nice.
Yeah. I know it was always been part of the OTS course was to bring people to the tropics. In fact, one of the reasons OTS was founded in Costa Rica was because of the diversity of the ecosystems that were here within a short distance. So it's interesting that you did that too. I can remember when I was a graduate student that I stopped at Los Tuxtlas.
Yes.
Because I had heard that it was a new Mexican field station, and so I got permission from Arturo Gomez Pampa to go to the station. And it must have been about this time, because when we got there was a very small old wood building, and the pallets were there with the concrete blocks on them.
Yeah.
It was obvious a station to be, but
no, the first proper buildings to live in and work, I think, were erected in the 70s, mid-70s. When I became director of the Institute of Biology, who ran these things, we built really the bigger installations with labs and a library and greenhouses, etc. So it really, you could accommodate 30 students easily with faculty and all that for courses. So they grew quite a bit in both stations.
You moved from being a faculty member to being director of the Institute of Ecology.
Yes, I was a research staff at the Institute, and then for a number of absolutely accidental reasons, I became dean or director of the Institute for 8 years. And then I was nominated vice rector for science, and then I was elected rector for 8 years,
8 years.
of the National University, which was a wonderful experience.
It was a wonderful experience.
I think it was a wonderful experience. Complicated, very different, obviously, from the academic life, but directed to academic life. I was one academic that was doing research all his life, and suddenly bumped into the position of being rector of that huge university. I never forgot that I was going back to my lab and to my cubicle, so I said I better try and leave a better university from the one I found.
So
I hope I did.
yeah, that's great. And so did you then, when you finally stepped out of the rectory, did you
No, I went back.
went back to your...
A month after I left the rectory of the university, I was in the field working for the second edition of Árboles Tropicales de Mexico with Terry Pennington. And after a few months, we were working for about 3 months, and finishing that, I was in Stanford teaching for a year. So, yeah, I was a bit nervous whether I would learn to swim back, to learn back to swim, teaching. I didn't do that bad. It was all right.
Oh, that's great. So, when you came back, then you say you went to Stanford to teach for a year. Was that something like a sabbatical or just an invitation?
It was a sabbatical after I finished my rectory. I was very generously, kindly invited by Hal Mooney, whom I knew from many years back in Los Tuxtlas and Chamela. I was invited to go as a visiting professor. Then I met very good friends. Besides Hal, was Paul Ehrlich, Anand, and a number of other people there. It was a very nice experience. So I returned to my lab again to do work. But at that time I was more involved into a new field, which was global environmental issues and biodiversity. And that brought me to a completely different area, which I am very glad I did, because a number of years earlier, in 1991, when I was rector, I received a call from the President Salinas from Mexico, saying, listen, give me an idea of what to take. What will be the Mexican contribution to the Rio meeting next year, in '92? Something that is really, shows the interest of the country in biodiversity. He asked me for an idea, and then I had, as I was going to say, this vision of the planets aligned, and I said, this is the opportunity. So what I came up was the idea of a National Commission on Biodiversity, which is CONABIO, the Mexican National Commission on Biodiversity. It wasn't immediately called like that, because we gathered the best people in biodiversity at that time for an international meeting, which finished suggesting and recommending President Salinas for Mexico to have a National Commission on Biodiversity. So that gave him the platform to launch this idea. And ever since, it's been going on very nicely. The first person to direct that on the ground was Jorge Soberon, who is now in Kansas, working in bioinformatics. He's a phenomenal fellow. He really made a marvelous work on the first 15 years of CONABIO. And after he left, a few years later, I I said, well, I'll have a hand trying to sort of adopt an adolescent, which I gave birth to, almost 20 years earlier, or 18 years earlier. So I am completely into that. CONABIO is an interministerial governmental commission which generates information to have intelligence on how to manage the natural resources of the country.
Oh, that's great.
We are devoted only to generate information. We don't have any other role. We don't give permits. We don't make any laws or regulations, anything. It's just
divulge
an
information.
apparatus devoted to generating the best possible information on biodiversity, all the way from genes to ecosystems.
That's terrific.
That's a nice way of ending the
Well, Jose,
the tour.
Thank you for your time here. I've been speaking with José Sarukhán, one of the original teachers of the OTS course all the way back to the early 60s. And
Yeah, 65.
it's really a pleasure to have you here on the
It is
50th
wonderful.
anniversary.
It is wonderful to be here and to see so many excellent, good colleagues and friends, many of whom I hadn't seen for decades. So it's been a wonderful experience.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you
Jose.
for the invitation.